What's up YouTube? Welcome to today's video where I woke up in the morning, I got a cup of coffee right here, and then I decided to read a 70-page manifesto about feedback for 3.19. And I saw this because on Reddit, there was this person who wrote, I wrote a yada 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 70-page length dissertation, PhD, for his school. Not really, he just did it because he was bored. But basically, what better way to spend your morning than reading a 70-page feedback post? And it got pretty big. This is for sure a new record, our new dev manifesto for PoE. Pretty much this person pointed out more good points than GGG has done in their previous manifestos and actually gave out some pretty good suggestions. Now, I didn't actually read it. I'm going to be honest. I have a confession to make. I didn't actually fully read it. I read the condensed version that's only 6 pages long. I mean, it's still 6 pages, but he got most of the important points, and I did skim the other one. The other one just had a lot more, facts supporting his points, or just more data sets. Like, he would try to calculate the number of Archnemesis mods and stuff like that, and combinations that are possible. But before we go into it about this person's post, and we will try to break it down as fast as possible, we first need to look at the credentials of the person, right? Because credentials does matter, although sometimes you can say in sports when you have a coach, your coach can suck major D normally, right? Like, they might not have won a championship, but sometimes you don't need to be the best player in the world to write a dissertation or to coach someone. And this guy is probably not the best player in the world, although he has played PoE for 2,500 hours. However, he does write that he's played games for 16 years already, multiplayer, MOBA, RPG strategy, RTS, FPS, and so on. So he knows it all. He is well-versed in the skill of video gaming. However, there's no other game than PoE that hooked me back in. Legion League. It was hard, complicated, and free Diablo 2 basically for me. That's why I started playing it, and it's because Crypt posted some content from PoE. And that's pretty much the same for me. I saw Crypt play PoE back in the day, and I was like, wow, maybe I should try out PoE instead of D3. And I was playing D3 originally, and it was quite an experience. And PoE was a really, really bad game at the start. I don't think that anyone can really argue that the current version of PoE is much better than whatever was going on when I first started playing it. So he has played this league for around 6 days total, roughly 140 hours. So let's go straight into it and see what points he brings up. So first off, of course, number one thing he wants to address is loot and Archnemesis in 3.19. And let's go straight into his post. So I actually did look at some of the stuff that he mentioned in here, loot and Archnemesis in 3.19. So he brings up a lot of good points, and that according to your recent philosophies, players should fight fewer rare monsters but more challenging, and there shouldn't be a gap between difficulty and rewards. And he pretty much saying loot explosions from a rare monster are considered to be fun for players. There's a bit of misunderstanding why loot explosions are fun at all, and players have no control of when it will happen. Players feel rewarded with both game rewards and feeling outside of game. But they fail to do some things, right? So loot explosion of low value items is not going to feel way better than dropping a lower quantity of the same item. So seeing a lot of flash, whetstones, and fracture base types on bad bases is not really going to bring you the same excitement. With the introduction of mod conversions based on rarity of an item, there's an issue where people do not bring another party member of increased quad. So he's pretty much talking about an MF Cole meta. So there's a couple ways of dealing with this. So in terms of the MF Cole meta, I do think the best solution, and he didn't really mention this, but I do think that the loot explosion should snapshot the map player and party quantity / rarity when you first encounter the mob. Right now, the mob already snapshots the party quant, so you can't really TP like 6 people inside and suddenly have 6-player quant where you kill the mob. So if the map can somehow snapshot the player quant that you have and the map quant and rarity, then that could be something that we could do in order to stop the MF Cole meta. And this wouldn't completely kill off the MF meta completely. And then he does this solution, which I'm not really sure how good it is. He wants a 5% base chance to convert loot to get something better. Let's say you get a bunch of flasks, was his example. He would say you could convert it to baubles. Now, the funny thing is, and he probably doesn't know this, is that baubles are actually worth less than like a high-level flask. And the main problem with flasks is that people don't really want to sell them. So it's kind of hard to say whether this solution is going to work, but I do think less amounts of something and having a small base chance to convert into something more valuable will feel a lot better. But I don't really know how you convert like maps or something into something better. Maybe a Delhi Orbs map or something like that. So there are a lot of suggestions. I do think that this could make the general mapping feel a lot better with a small base chance. Now, he wants to increase the base quantity and rarity of league mechanics that don't have flat base rewards. So what he means by this is right now, obviously, Legion, Expedition, and stuff like that have guaranteed rewards based on their reward template. So he basically wants to do a better balance pass-through than GGG did, where he actually increases the quant and rarity of certain league mechanics. I mean, this seems like a no-brainer that GGG should have done initially. So you would pretty much make Breach have a higher base party quant, or not party quant, but quant and rarity. You would make Breach, Abyss, Harbinger, and stuff like that. And now it's pretty much to bring in line the bad league mechanics with the league mechanics that are overperforming, like Legion, because they have reward templates. I do think that this is pretty good, and this is probably something that GGG should have initially done in order to make it feel more rewarding to do every single league mechanic. If you look right now, there's a reason why Breach scares are pretty much worthless. And next up, he brings up about there's too many Archnemesis modifier combinations that can lead to extremely unfair experiences. And wow, this section was crazy, right? So he actually talked about mod stacking, and he would go into all of this detail, how every single time you introduce another mod, you have an infinitely higher amount of combinations. So 2 mod monsters, 1,596 combinations, 3 mod monsters, 29,260. Now, this leads to some worst case scenarios that he shows right here, where the mob is just nearly unkillable because it has too much resist, it has too much life. So it kind of leads to a D2 experience where you're dealing with mobs that pretty much have immunities, and that's just a pretty bad thing. Now, this next part is the classic GGG, and I could see GGG doing this because this would actually kill off Headhunter even more. And this is the fact that there's too many Archnemesis modifiers in the game. And he's actually completely right about this. If you actually look down the list of Archnemesis modifiers, there's so many modifiers that literally do the exact same thing. There's multiple ones that convert Fizz to a certain element, and there's some that give like elemental damage. And there's probably too many. And there's no need to have that many. And having more of the same modifiers or same type of modifiers to do the same thing pretty much means that you're going to get this worst case scenario where you get this unkillable mob. And he is definitely true in that you can probably remove some of them and streamline it. But if they do that, it's probably going to completely kill off Headhunter. Now, next up, he brings up Harvest. And this thing I don't really see as being that big of a deal. I mean, you sometimes get 0 Harvest Life Force from a plot. And that is definitely true. If you don't actually get the highest tier rarity monster or whatever, then you're pretty much going to be coming out of the Harvest with nothing. And it feels really, really bad. Maybe they can make it so every single Harvest plot has like a baseline of having the rare beast or whatever it's called. Now, his main concern with Harvest was that GGG didn't actually give a valid explanation of why they got rid of Reforged Key Prefix and Suffix, and this is pretty much exactly what I was saying. So he's saying that there's 4 different type of players: a mirror tier player that craft mirror tier item, there's semi-mirror tier players that craft close to perfect items, and then there's the average player like me that crafts some good items in Harvest. And then there's a casual player that occasionally engages with Harvest, but has limited knowledge in crafting. So he's saying that pretty much everyone that's average and above have access to Harvest in some way through TFT in the past, and they were actually able to trade their Harvest crafts. And that is true, but I do think a lot of people don't really know what TFT is. But his main concern is that some average players and above were still using Harvest as one of the best methods for crafting high-end items, since then to say that Harvest was not quite tradable, but definitely not non-tradable. And that's an important distinction, is that people were definitely trading Harvest. And the other thing he had a problem with is that why not just gate the rarity of Reforged Key Prefix and Suffix by the price of the Life Force? And this is something that I brought up a lot of times. If the price of Reforged Key Prefix and Suffix was 20,000 or 30,000 Life Force and required a Sacred Blossom, people would not be so crazy about the Harvest changes, and this is definitely true. Now, next up, he brings up something that some people actually talk about a little bit, but not that many people complain about, and I think this is more because there's so many things to complain about that this doesn't seem like that big of an issue. But he's very upset about the removal of jewel implicits, and this is pretty much because it is incredibly expensive to fully min-max your character and get the right jewel implicits in the past. For the ones that are really, really good, like chance to avoid being stunned, I actually used over 200 of them during the Gauntlet League and never saw it one time. It is that rare. So the fact remains that you can make the cost of the life force more expensive for these crafts, and you just give something else for a player to min-max. And if GGG is really about trying to increase player retention by giving them more stuff to do for their character, there is no reason why you wouldn't increase the jewel implicits still. And I don't really know why they removed it. Maybe they just didn't want anything too deterministic. But even if you think that there's some mods that are too powerful, he does mention that you can remove the problematic modifiers, like say it'd be chance to avoid being stunned or maybe shock immunity or something like that. But just a bad idea, according to him, by what GGG did to Harvest. Now, next up, he kind of brings in a very, very interesting argument about why Lake of Kalandra is so bad. And this just goes beyond the basics of what I've been saying, which is the Lake of Kalandra is just not rewarding straight up. The base chests are not rewarding enough. It doesn't scale enough with difficulty. And the past league mechanics are just completely awful. I am still flabbergasted, to be frank, that they haven't changed Lake of Kalandra to be more rewarding. It is a temporary league mechanic, and I just can't understand the decision making. But basically, he says that Lake of Kalandra has very little base rewards like Expedition, and going for optimized rewards requires you to engage with a system where you have limited control over what rewards you'll get. And this is something that when I first did the Lake, I was pretty confused. I'm like, if I put this flame thing here, a brutality thing here, or a tyranny thing here, what do I actually get? The only thing I understood for sure was that the past league mechanics will probably give me some rewards from that specific past league mechanic. But the other ones that spawn the packs of mobs, I have no idea what type of chests I'll get. And that's kind of the main problem with the whole mechanic, according to him, is that you don't have player agency. In Expedition, you could choose to make your encounter more difficult, and you can choose how to increase your quantity, your amount of remnants you get, the chances you get a logbook. Now, you might be saying his solution where you just put the reward tiles could make it so that you always just choose the best reward. And they could incentivize it so that if you fight a difficult encounter and get rewarded, so you can increase difficulty scaling with rewards from chests, so the more difficult the encounter is. And I think this is already in the game. So this would incentivize people to run higher difficulty tiles for better rewards. And since the rewards are random, you can fight a difficult encounter and get rewarded with close to nothing. And this is definitely true. You can put the hardest encounter somewhere, but because the reward, you don't know what it is beforehand, you can just get a chest that is useless, like getting an armor chest or a unique chest or something like that. Now, I think he also has something else to say about the whole lake, in that it's always kind of random in what you can get. You can't really make the best lake every single time, and maybe that's a good thing, maybe that's a bad thing, but it pretty much all revolves around doing some sort of snake loop that allows you to increase the difficulty as long as possible. So we actually want to look here. He actually talks about, and he actually did break it down so well into, what's it called? Oh, he actually made this section real short. So regular monster tiles, solution. For all non-league mechanic tiles, inform the player about the reward type pre-rolled on it. Allow league mechanics inside a lake to scale with Atlas passes. Now this is pretty big, because I do think that part of the reason why the league mechanic feels so bad is it doesn't scale with Atlas passes. It's out of the map league mechanic. Now obviously his suggestion is not going to be implementable because it's kind of complicated. You can't really just put the Atlas passives into the Lake of Kalandra. And maybe it would work if GGG actually planned it ahead of time. But TLDR is Lake of Kalandra, in addition to be unrewarding, takes away player choice. You can't really make your perfect lake all the time. You don't know what rewards you'll be getting, and you don't know if the difficulty of that specific tile set you'll be doing will be rewarding, which is terrible. So no player agency and bad rewards leads to bad league mechanic. Now, next up, he goes into the defense and balance tirade. And this is something that I have personally experienced a lot. And he mentions the importance of capping suppression even in softcore. Right now in PoE, if you don't know, if you don't have 100% spell suppression, it actually doesn't give you the elemental max hit. So you need to have 100% spell suppression. If you don't have it, you'll eventually die. Now, next up, he mentions a big thing, which is why players die so much. And this is something that I see a lot. A lot of people go into my Discord and ask me, why am I dying? My character looks like they're tanky. And more often than not, it is pretty much because you have no defenses against chaos damage. So there's been a huge increase in chaos damage in general in currently existing defensive options, but getting 75% chaos res is pretty hard. And this is pretty much because of Archnemesis modifiers like Toxic or something like that. It just feels really, really bad to play against. And there's no alternative to physical mitigation, according to him, rather than running Determination and Molten Shell. And that is pretty much true. Determination and cast when damage taken Molten Shell is pretty much broken right now, and it's pretty much the best defense by far. Now, only viable option for Energy Shield users is to run Determination Molten Shell, path left to grab Glancing Blows of a Divine Shield, and put on Aegis Aurora. Now, the reasoning behind this is because spell suppression is only available on evasion basis. So it is very, very hard for Energy Shield users without the Sentinel Recombinators to actually run spell suppression. So you're forced to do Melting of the Flesh and Aegis Aurora because 90 res is pretty much just as good as having 100% spell suppression. In fact, it's better. Now, he does mention that a lot of builds are limited in their diversity, pretty much because you have to check so many things for defensive stats in your build, and you pretty much leave out no room for your actual damage nodes. So you have to use a super meta skill because there's so many defensive things that need to be checked off. You need to have a certain amount of HP. You need to have 100% spell suppression. You need to run Determination. You probably need to run Grace. You also probably need to run Molten Shell. And there's just so many things that you need to check off, and that is made even harder by the removal of the Reservation Efficiency Mastery. Now, he does have a lot of interesting solutions, but he does mention this one thing right here, which I thought was important to put out, was that the quadruple nerf to Melting was actually huge. They nerfed Melting to give you negative all res. They nerfed the crafting for +2 amulet and other sources of gem level, which matters for purities. They removed the Reservation Efficiency Mastery, which makes it harder to run purities for Melting. And then Aegis Aurora is also a lot rare, and 20 divines or 18 divines right now. And they pretty much, instead of nerfing the interaction between Aegis and Melting and a synergy, they made it so that Melting is harder to use for everyone, no matter what ascendancy and build you're playing. So it's just really unfortunate what they did to Melting of the Flesh, because Melting of the Flesh actually represented a viable option outside of 100% spell suppression. Now, next up, he goes on a little bit of a rant about RNG-based crafting problems, and his main thing is that there's very few sources of deterministic crafting remaining in the game. And one solution he had was he wants to make it so high item level bases cannot roll the lowest mods. So you have an eye level 86 Lion Pelt, you shouldn't be able to roll 9 to 19 life or T10 life. And this is something that has been talked about a lot, but he wants to introduce a smart loot system, as there's almost no incentive to pick up rares from the ground. And this is something that we've seen a lot of, in that GGG really does not want to implement the system yet. They've tried it a lot. You can see this in Talisman and stuff like that, where you can find amulets that were super well rolled, but they don't really want to introduce this yet. I'm not really sure. Next up, he wants to rework Eldritch currency to work on all items with an enchant. And this is a pretty interesting solution. He wants to create an enchant for each of weapon, shield, quiver, jewelry slots, make half of the enchants be viable for Siri Exarch, and the other half for Eater of Worlds. Only one enchant can exist at a time. And then with these enchants, you can use your Eldritch Exalt, Annuls, and Chaos Orbs. I do think that this is probably never going to happen. It's too strong. Eldritch Annul is an extremely powerful crafting tool. And as I say, there's lots of great points brought up, but GGG will not give us more sources of targeted Annuls. Targeted Annuls are probably the most powerful crafting tool a crafter can have at their disposal. I see a lot of people say, oh, why not just make it so that we can annul a random prefix or suffix on the bench for 2 divines? And those people probably just don't really understand how powerful that actually is. Targeted Annul is an insane craft that will probably not be existing outside of a temporary leak mechanic. If you remember, targeted Annuls were one of the first things to get removed in the first Harvest wipe, where they got rid of remove lightning or remove crit. And it's just extremely strong because it allows you to pretty much go back a step in your craft, and it's like a mini eternal orb in a sort of way. Now, as I said before, and he pretty much agrees with me, is that defense is very build constraining, as you have to invest into so many different areas that you're forced to play the most meta builds in order to reach a necessary damage threshold. And this could be alleviated, and we will make another video talking about this, because I do think that there is a huge difference between nerfing a skill and then buffing its competitors. It's kind of a Dota balance philosophy that I kind of learned about on Reddit, is that you don't need to nerf a skill to bring it down to its peers. You can buff the underperforming skills and archetypes so that players don't feel as bad, but in the end result, it's more or less the same because you're increasing build diversity. And I do think that this is something that GGG should try to do, because you will notice that most of the meta skills are meta because they just do a lot of damage. Simple as that. Like, yeah, they're okay mechanically, but it's not like Lightning Strike is even the best mechanical skill in the game or best clear skill in the game. And he does bring up a great point about lakes, and I do think that this is something that is very, very true. And this is probably something that people would complain a lot more about if the lakes weren't just so bad with their rewards currently. Like, the lakes do not offer you player agency. It does offer a lot of RNG, I think, but I do think that you can't really see what rewards you're getting, which is just a terrible, terrible thing. And then having the layout of the lake is pretty much RNG. But I guess that's the fun part, and that it will feel really good to get a 16 difficulty lake. So I'm kind of on the fence about what he said about it. I do think that you shouldn't be able to make the best lake every single time. And it's the same thing as incursion. You shouldn't be getting a perfect incursion tempo with a double corrupt and double gem corrupt every single time. Now, I do hope that GGG reads part of this manifesto and considers his input in future changes. What am I kidding? They're not going to read any part of this manifesto. The chances they actually read this manifesto and implement some of these changes are pretty low. They might implement some of these changes naturally, just because a lot of these changes do make sense that he suggested. But what's the chances they're going to nerf Archnemesis even more? It would literally be the 6th time nerfing Archnemesis since the start of this league. But thanks for watching, everyone. I hope that this kind of answered all of the questions of what this guy brought up, and I try to give some of my own input. But more or less, this guy was pretty right in everything he said. And number one point that he brought up was definitely GGG should give us a better explanation for why remove key prefix or why reforge key prefix and reforge key suffix should be removed, because their current explanation is bad. But thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you find more Mirrors, Exalted Orbs, and Mage Bloods than me, and more 80-page dissertations. And see you next time. Bye.